Hello, Podcast Land. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Memories with a Beat. And today I have Andy Frye here with me. Thank you for joining me, Andy.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you and good to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, today, you guys, we are going to be talking about Len and Steal My Sunshine. You probably saw the title of the episode. I hope that you guys had like some nostalgic, memories come to mind. I know I sure did. And then when I looked into some more information about the song, they likened it to Smash Mouth and Sugar Ray, which I felt like was dead on. And then just some information about Len and the song itself is they're actually a Canadian rock alternative band, which I did not realize that they were Canadian. And I think it's so interesting that when people are from another country, we don't hear their accents when they sing. Isn't that like the craziest thing?
Yeah, there's a couple bands. So an Anglophile, so that I can talk to you about a couple of bands in the whole 90s Britpop thing and how some of that is true and some of it's not true.
Anyway, so a little bit more about the song, you guys, is that it came out in 99, you guys. This is the year after I graduated. And then maybe you even have a take on this, Andy, but when I was looking up in song facts, it was saying that the song is a little bit about having FOMO, but I didn't really get that except for him saying, what he wants to do. And then if you steal my sunshine, but I don't know, maybe we'll just start there. And do you want to expand on that a little bit? Because that's just
Yeah,
not what comes to mind when I think of this song.
I don't know. I think maybe generationally you're kind of more the tail of Gen X than I'm, kind of in the middle of it, or I don't know what you consider yourself. But I think FOMO
Yeah.
always existed. It's one of those things like, the concept that something is creepy always existed, but we really didn't start using the word creepy until probably about 10, 15 years ago. I've seen the movie Days Confused 100 times, and it definitely influences my book.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where, Wooderson or Matthew McConaughey pulls up and he hits on the redhead who's driving the station wagon, and this thing that her nerd friend in the front seat
Yeah.
says, that was so creepy. And I was just thinking, like, nobody ever said, I'm sure nobody said it in the 70s, but definitely nobody said it in the 80s. It was kind of the word that popped up. So FOMO, and we have all these acronyms now. And FOMO, I think, always existed. I definitely had it. So I grew up on the East Coast outside Philadelphia. I live in Chicago now. I've been here more than half my life. But so as a senior, I'll give you this example, and it kind of relates to the video of Len Steal My Sunshine, is that everybody, right, the week
Yeah.
after graduation, we went to senior week and you went to the Jersey Shore. You go to a place like Wildwood or Ocean City, or maybe if your parents, had a house, you go to Sea Isle, which is a lot more tame, but you try to go to Ocean City. And I was like, I was the oldest kid in my family, so I didn't really go out as much. And I didn't get invited to go down to Wildwood or Ocean City with one of my sets of friends, maybe because I wasn't in as
Mm.
deep with them because I didn't hang out. I didn't stay up till 2 in the morning. I didn't play football. So I remember like that whole time looking, is anybody going to ask me to go down the shore? Like, what the
Uh,
F, man? Like, and I had that, even though before it was happening, I knew it was going to happen. Like, I was going to miss out on senior week down the shore, which my parents probably wouldn't have let me go anyway because they were, the kind of uptight in some ways. Maybe just because I was the oldest child and I don't know. I seemed like I was a basket case at the time, but it didn't happen. We ended up going to my family ended up taking a trip to Bermuda anyway, which Bermuda is beautiful, but for an 18-year-old, it's kind of
mm.
lame.
Yeah.
So I had this double FOMO of like, my friends are even not the ones who are going to end up getting arrested, just the ones who are just hanging out, having a good time, not getting in trouble. I'm missing out on that. And I'm in this place where, every restaurant in Bermuda at the time in 1990 and was playing Kenny G all the time, which,
Oh.
I I can go a different route and talk about how I'd rather go to the dentist than listen to Kenny G. But yeah, so it definitely was a real thing. So when this song came out in 1999, when I was a grown up, it definitely detailed something that had always been there, and then it probably took millennials and the internet and acronyms for everything to come up with fear of missing out or FOMO. I don't know who coined that term first, but I'm sure at some point in your life you felt fear of missing out when you were that age or younger, but it's just articulated differently and done perfectly in this song.
Yeah, yeah. I think that you bring up a good point that it probably was more in the 90s or even a little bit later because of texting. So, we were
Hmm.
simplifying everything. And so a lot of those acronyms come out now because of that. Well, I should let you guys know listening that Andy is just such a wealth of knowledge because he is actually a professional writer, and he used to be, pretty big into the music scene too, being a disc jockey. So, that's why he has all the insights and everything. And that was one of the main reasons, Andy, that I really wanted to, find out what song you wanted to talk about and why you wanted to talk about it. I think we've already said it, but it's If You Steal My Sunshine by Len. Maybe just go into, how you connect with this song, or where you're transported to when you hear this song.
Yeah, well, let me start out with I don't know if you felt this, but like there's actually a thing that I don't think exists anymore. My 16-year-old is plays guitar, he loves rock music, but he listens to a lot more than I would have at that age. So like
Mhm.
if you were into the Smiths and the Cure in high school in 1987, like there's no you would have to secretly acknowledge that you liked a song by the Information Society or Bon Jovi. Like you wouldn't be like, "Well, I like this and I like this too." Like I like Bauhaus, but I can also like Def Leppard. Like that was not kosher when we were growing
Pick
up.
a
So
lane and stay in it.
yeah, so I probably made some change to like I do remember that I had a number of friends that all had older brothers and sisters in college. So on the East Coast, it was like we had college radio, and a friend of mine named Andy Newman had I think he had a brother at University of Delaware who would, so Andy always had like the coolest clothes, listened to the coolest music. And I would say to him, like, I actually harassed him. I gave him a cassette tape. I'm like, tape whatever your brother's bringing home. I want some of that. There was that piece of it. So, when the 90s happened and pop radio went from Amy Grant and Debbie Gibson and, Bon Jovi to, within a year or two to Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Liz Phair, um, bands that were doing different things that weren't just grunge and just punk. It was like a revelation. But I always liked the pop in the background, the good pop. So I'm an Anglophile. I
Yeah.
love bands that some people may write off as shameless pop like Oasis, but I liked the
I
stuff that
like
informed
Oasis.
that. Like I love the Stone Roses, and I like some of the stuff like the dancey stuff like Happy Mondays too, but I also like the Beatles and the Who and all that stuff. So I always had my ear kind of turned on to what was coming out of Britain and other places. So in 1999, I was like 27, going on 28, and I just remember this song popped up. I was part of the soundtrack of the movie called Go, and I love the movie Go, but it's kind of like a mini Pulp Fiction in terms of the way just the crazy action in the film, and it was really about like not adults, but you know, maybe 20 somethings like 2022 working these crappy jobs and having this strange weekend that happened. And the soundtrack was pretty good. And Len Steal My Sunshine was, I think, the one song that really sailed from that. So I have always thought of it as a great song. But in the last couple of years, to kind of answer your question, is that I've started to see Steal My Sunshine as the other bookend to the 90s music scene. So if we decide that, and it seems like the consensus is that musically the 90s really started with Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit, because that flicked a switch and a lot of things changed after that. And there was an interest going from bands that were completely corporate or singer-songwriters that are completely corporate to these garage rock type bands that write their own songs and play their own instruments that are falling apart. A lot of cool stuff happened in the 90s, and Still Mine Sunshine, to me, it's like the perfect song to kind of look back at how great the 90s were. And also, the song is about both having a good time and also missing out on having a good time, however you want to take that, whether it's you were too young to really enjoy the 90s, or you're like me, you kind of wish that I could turn on the radio and hear all bands and not, K-pop and teeny stuff. I think the song's, whether it was intentional or not, it says a lot more about the 90s that it probably intended to, and definitely for someone like me who's really into music.
Yeah. Well, when I see the video, it does make me think of a lot of things that you said. It made me think of a pier or a boardwalk, and I was thinking Jersey, so I hit the nail on the head with that one. Maybe, I mean, like
Yeah.
us sharing that same idea, or you having that reflection when you hear the song. And then
Mhm.
it does kind of seem like one of the descriptions of the song was that it was like a trippy song or whatever, and it does kind of feel like, yeah, maybe you're a little high or something and reflecting on the 90s. It does feel like a reflective song. It does feel like he's saying he's
Yeah.
lying on the grass and he's thinking about what happened. And he said on Song Facts when he wrote the song that it was actually like 3 a.m. and he was staring up into the skies and this wild party had just happened and he was kind of reflecting on it. And so I think the same thing, like, when you're saying that this kind of bookends the end of the '90s, I think that that's an appropriate comment, and also the fact that it's reflective of the '90s, and the song itself is just kinda like it's happy, and it's kinda, like, boppy, earwormy, and it's kinda making you think,
Yeah,
like I said, reflectively.
yeah,
So I like that you're saying that it kind of is like encapsulating the '90s itself, and then that video, just the way they're dressed and everything. So if I was invited to a '90s party, I'm not really sure what I would
yeah,
wear other than I would try to look for Junkos, but other than that, I don't really know what I would wear. So, I do like the video for that too, that it just kind of is, indicative of what we
yeah,
were wearing in the '90s, so that's pretty cool. This is actually well, they call this group a one-hit wonder, which you were kind of alluding to that too,
yep,
but this song got played so much, it actually went platinum, which I think is amazing.
yeah.
To have a one-hit wonder and have it be that successful is crazy cool.
Yeah, and as I told you before the broadcast, I'm not on TikTok, but some of what is on TikTok bleeds over to Instagram. So if you're, Gen Xer like me, there's only so much social media that you can swallow. And so I subscribe to a lot of music stuff. I'll look at music videos and like there's some DJs who will do like, 10 hits from 1993 or whatever. So then Tribe Called Quest will pop up. So I
Yeah.
saw one that was like the year 1999, and there was a little bit of Britney Spears and a little bit of like boy band crap. But there was also like some Smash Mouth, and I can't even remember what else alternative wise, but there are a couple of alternative bands. And then Steal My Sunshine was like the third song in it. So I was like, thank you for recognizing that this is
Mm,
one of the key songs of the 1990s, whether, you're just from the top level, not even saying, well, here's the rock songs, here's the pop songs, that here's one of the, the seven that made the cut for whoever did this video that popped up for me a couple of days ago on social media. So I think it does have staying power. And I don't know if I
mm,
mentioned already, I mentioned at least probably once an hour, Days Confused, a movie that it came out, it was just kinda like the fun stoner movie. We didn't know that we were watching. I think there's like 3 or 4 Oscar winners in that film. There's, Matthew
yeah.
McConaughey and Ben Affleck, and I literally watched it for like the 50th time or 100th time this weekend, and I finally caught Renee Zellweger. I'm like, "There she is," and there's a scene where, the girls are getting hazed. They're spraying, like, ketchup and mustard all over these, freshmen to
Yes.
be, and I don't know why it took me this long. I'm like, "Oh, well, there she is." I mean, I knew she was in the movie supposedly, but she doesn't have any lines, and I just kind of paused it and said, to my wife and kid, I was like, "Oh, there she is. There's another Oscar winner." And then I think the two guys who were the nerds, Adam Goldberg and
Oh,
Anthony Rapp,
yeah.
and Parker Posey's been in all the great independent stuff. So it's like we didn't know when we were watching that movie the first time, like this is really going to be a big thing, a great. I mean, it's really my generation's American Graffiti, and it was the start of a great. I think I'm not even talking about Linklater's career as a filmmaker, but just like a trend of like how film changed in the '90s, the way that music changed in the '90s. That's probably a whole nother broadcast right there. But things changed and things got more creative and sort of original. I'm not saying that you know artists from the '80s like Prince and Springsteen, Madonna weren't original. It just had a different craft to it that came alive in the '90s, and I think that "Steal My Sunshine" sort of like Eminem's first single, it kind of wraps up a lot of stuff that was going on
Yeah.
previous to it.
Well, I think that you make a
So
good point with saying that you think Nirvana started it and that there was such an attraction because it was something different. I think that those
yeah,
artists, the ones that are really like thinking outside the box or whatever, they end up giving permission to this whole
mhm,
new wave, right? And so I think that, yeah,
the
I
way
think that that's
yeah,
what Nirvana did is they ended up giving that permission to other groups to go, okay, so I don't have to pick a lane and stay in it. I'm going to kind of explore, and this is what we're going to mash up some stuff, and this is our flair. So we end up getting punk rock and
yeah.
alternative and all the other great genres of music. So I think that's a valid point.
I would asterisk Nirvana though, because I mean, what it's alluding to is that so before I wasn't just like I have to say that slightly before that there was kind of a push. There were artists. Obviously, The Cure was around. If you turned on some radio, it's definitely college radio, but then some of the stations on the East Coast that would kind of dabble in stuff. Like the Pixies. "Here Comes Your Man." I'm not a huge super fan of the Pixies, but like that's such a unique tune that I was impressed that it hung around in the late '80s, and they were this weird band from Boston that college kids were into. It definitely was not going along. It didn't really blend with what else was going on the radio, but it was on the radio. You had a little bit of stuff that was kind of more alternative, like the cult popping up. They never really became famous until after the fact. And in 1990, when I graduated high school, other than Guns N' Roses, the biggest hard rock band in the world was Living Color, and they had 2 platinum albums, and they've kind of faded a little bit, sort of like the way that Jane's Addiction faded and came back. So there was all that was happening before Nirvana. Nirvana kind of, I guess, carried the ball across the line, or did something that really flicked the switch. David Geffen was behind it. I mean, he also gave us Guns N' Roses,
Mhm.
really. So, there was definitely a changeover, but there were, Echo and the Bunnymen was around. There's all kinds of good bands that were sort of pushing the envelope. Before then, it took Nirvana, for whatever reason, to really flick the switch.
I would agree with that. So you talk a lot about the 90s, and I have
Mhm.
2 thoughts or 2 opinions about that. I've heard before that the music that we hear when we're in high school and college is the music we kind of cling to for the rest of our lives. And I think that that's kind of true. Today, I was actually out
Mhm.
and about and I had a Pandora station on. And it was 80s, 90s, and today's hits. And I was like, God, I just love this radio. And every song
Mhm.
that, or this station, and every song that came on, I was like, oh, I loved this song. Oh, I loved this song. And then I was like, I'm going to listen to this more often. I'm going to pull this station up. And then it dawned on me this fact about the music that we hear in high school and college is the music that we tend to cling to for the rest of our lives. Which brings me to the next point
Yeah.
that you've written a book and it's 90 Days in the 90s and it's fictional. So
Yeah.
tell me, like, first of all, did your job as a disc jockey shape that book or have any influence on that book? And then B, why the 90s? Why is that your chosen decade?
Well, I was only a DJ in college for a little bit.
Okay.
I'm actually volunteering for a station now called Chirp Radio in Chicago. I was a lot more involved in writing. So I was probably always a writer. I was kind of a lazy student. Like, I wrote a little bit for the college newspapers, and then after college I did like the zine thing, when that was like you would walk in Tower Records and they would have real magazines that have like punk zines, and I never quite got mine on the rack, but I had some motivations to go see bands and review them, and did that in Chicago. And then I did, when websites were new, we did a music website. So eventually I was able to lead my career in sales and technology, and become full-time writer with a couple of gigs. I mean, I wrote for ESPN mostly about extreme sports, and then I dabbled in like music when ESPN had page two. I got to basically, my gig was interviewing aging rock stars about their sports hankering. So I got to interview Noel Gallagher from Oasis. I got to do an email Q&A with Morrissey, which took a couple months to hammer out, but when it didn't get blown off, and I got his press rep gave me like his answers, that was kind of cool that I interviewed Morrissey, even if it wasn't speaking to him, and a bunch
Right.
of other artists. I mean, not as many as I would have liked, but so that was there's that, and then I covered extreme sports, and gradually I've, since 2018, I've interviewed like a lot of professional athletes. And even if you're not into sports, I know that you know who Shaq is. I know that you know who
Yeah.
Tom Brady is. I know you know Billie Jean King. I've gotten to interview all these great athletes. One thing that I've had to do is become a really good interviewer, and ask questions that are pointed, not like pointed, but like straight to the point, open ended, like what we called it in sales was like open ended questions, where I
Right.
ask you to tell me about this, or I know this about you, elaborate, or tell me why you're motivated by that. So I think all writers want to write a book. And I think everybody who's even not a writer, we all have great ideas for a book. Like, this happened in my life. This is funny. This would make a great book. And then as a writer, you're like, am I a real writer if I haven't written a book? So I dabbled with a couple ideas for a long time. I always loved music. And I just had this idea. It really came from like a recurring joke that I had with my best friend, who's more of a poetry writer. I think we used to talk about like time traveling back to see, Hendrix's last concert, to see the Ramones play in 1978, and it's always kind of
Yeah.
a running joke. Hey, would it be cool? Would it be cool if we do that? And about 6 years ago, I was just kind of working on a Friday, took a break, went walking. I had a 90s playlist, and I don't even remember what song I was listening to, but I had that thought again, like, oh, wouldn't it be great to go back in time to see these bands, or to experience 90s music again. And I kept having the thought over the course of a couple days. And one thing that some writers do is that we write things down. I mean, there's sort of the proverbial story about the greatest idea in the world being written on a bar napkin, or when you
Right.
wake up in the middle of the night and write something so you don't forget it. For me, I wrote a couple things down. I thought, well, if I care about this in 2 or 3 weeks, like really care about it, like I'm excited about it right now, I'll see
Right.
if I can write a book. And then June 1st, 2017, I decided, okay, I'm still pretty psyched about this. Now I got to see what I can do. So it took a better part of 5 years. And long story short, I had created this play. The cool part was it took a while, but it wasn't that hard. I wanted it to be in Chicago. I wanted it to be about 90s music because I like those things. And as far as I know, there's no other book about 90s music as deep cut and as mine, and definitely not one about the Chicago music scene. So I ended up creating some characters, but then I created this place in the 90s with these people I wanted to hang out with. I wanted to like go to this show and it really was fueled by like it's interesting. Still My Sunshine talks about FOMO, whether it names it or not. Like a lot of it was that. There was when I was 20 something and the House of Blues opened up here in Chicago. And the first act was James Brown. And unless you were industry or you had a lot of money, you were not getting tickets to see James
Mhm.
Brown. I want to say it was like, I think it was New Year's Day 96 or a day or two after. Like you weren't getting into that show unless you knew somebody. But of course, I would have loved to see that. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of like, oh, that show that I couldn't get into. And there's a show by last example I'll give you. Used to be a place called Lounge Acts here in Chicago, and it was sort of profiled in High Fidelity, the movie. Actually, Lisa Bonet plays this character called Marita Sal, and she's playing a gig at Lounge Acts, and John Cusack's character walks right in. Like that was a place on Lincoln, and I remember being in line to see a band called the Spinanes. They were on Sub Pop. They weren't huge, but I was literally in line, and I was like the seventh person from the door when it sold out. So I was either gonna, like, I think it was
Oh,
ticketed. I don't. I mean, I know it was cash at the door, so I don't. You would have had to wait for somebody to leave for the night for me to get in. I was like, well, I guess I'm not getting in. And I've never seen that band, and they don't exist anymore as a band. So it's a lot of that made me think, okay, well, maybe it's just me being stupid here, talking about shows I saw and shows I wanted to see, and bands I loved, and what it was like to be there. So that's where I guess the spirit of the book came from, and it just took a while. And yeah, pumped it out last June 1st. It got published, and still talking about it now to Gen Xers and music enthusiasts and podcasters alike.
well, I think that's awesome. I mean, huge congratulations. I love the artwork of the book too. It just says 90s, I mean, all over it. So I think that that's really awesome. And I love that you have a book about the 90s and then you chose a song about the 90s. I think that's awesome. Hey, my North Florida women, I want to make memories with you. Let's make a deal. I'll find the venue, you join me, and together we'll make some memories. There's something so unique about watching someone perform music live. I'm going to find the best places right here in the Jacksonville, St. Augustine area for us to catch up on life and enjoy great music. Join the Facebook group, Women Making Memories to a Beat, to check out all the next events. Going back to the song a little bit,
Mhm.
I want to first ask and clarify the memory is that summer of not being able to go with your friends. You went to Bermuda instead. And what was your friend's name? Andy, that had like the cool music and everything. And Andy got to go to Ocean City?
Andy Newman, who I just reconnected with. He's not on Facebook. I just reconnected with Andy Newman on LinkedIn. I like a couple of months ago. I was like, dude, like I wrote this book, and um, I think I was on a podcast. And I mentioned him. I'm like, I hope it's okay. I mentioned you because it's like you were the. I don't think that he liked me back in high school as much as like he's really nice now. I think I was like annoying to him that I was like, dude, you got to take me like whatever your brother's listening to. What he gave me was one side was Husker Du's Candy Apple Gray, the other side was Meat Is Murder by the Smiths, the original version. Where I think if you buy it now, How Soon Is Now is actually the first song. It was like the last song on the first side.
Okay.
So I mean, it really took off from there, and I probably owe the guy a beer, I guess.
So when do you put this song on now? When you're what is the emotion, or is it on a playlist, or are you just happy to come by it naturally from time to time?
It's a little bit of both. I keep hearing it on the radio. Like I was in a diner somewhere and it came on because they were playing like the hits of the 90s.
Yeah.
But yeah, if anybody's interested, like 90daysinthe90s.com is where you buy my book. But I put together a Spotify playlist, which is called 90 Days in the 90s. So it's the cover of the book. You'll see the train and the red cover. And there are 90 songs. They're from the 90s. And I think that Still My Sunshine might be the last one. It's
Yeah.
one of the ones I added towards the end. If anybody listening to this has not heard that song, definitely go listen to it. It'll be in your head for a while.
Well, it's a
But you
great
can find it
song.
anywhere now thanks to the spirit of the '90s remaining alive. It's It's out and about now.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great song. I love when somebody reminds me of a great song. We live in Florida, so we golf cart around. It's a golf cart community. And so I do have playlists that I pull up just for that when it's like sunny, carefree day and we're just like going to the grocery store or the pool or something, and we just want that carefree music on. So that I'm definitely going to add it to that. My audience knows I have a playlist as well. I have a playlist on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. This song will be on there, but if you guys are like me, I will for sure find the 90 Days in the 90s
Yeah,
playlist.
Spotify is good in that it feels like a record store where, like, you're going through the stacks where you have no commitment. If you
Right.
like, Bob Marley, but you don't know much about reggae and you wanna know what Toots and the Maytals sound like, or King Frye, who's, like, really deep cut in reggae, it's there, and if you like it, you can subscribe more or go buy the record or download it or whatever.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I actually went to go see a band last night, and so I want to remind my audience, Women Making Memories to a Beat. Check it out. It's a Facebook group, and it's just a chance to explore more music. I want to, expose all of us to live music and get out and make some memories, just like Andy is sharing, the memory of everybody going out and you're stuck home. And so we all have those songs that we relate to for whatever reason that brings us back in time. And we have those memories associated with it. I have one last question for you, Andy. When you buy a CD or a cassette and you pull out the leaflet, do you read all the words or do you listen to the music and then go back and say, okay, now what's this song about?
It kinda depends. I mean, so I just, got a new vehicle that does not have a CD player anymore, so I'm a little screwed in that department, but, historically, it kinda depends on if the how much the artist interests me, especially, like, the artists that you don't know anything about them
Okay.
to do that. So, like, when I first picked up Jane's Addiction back in the early '90s, like, I had a friend, my friend Jennifer Margusak I went to high school with, her brother wrote for The Reader here. He was like a big fish in the small pond here of, Chicago music, and, I remember when she brought Nothing Shocking, I think in a CD, which was in 1989, it was, like, bizarre as hell, and, like, "Hey, I
Uh-huh.
wanna listen to that." And she kinda played this game with me, like, "Oh, like, do you even know one of their songs?" I'm like, "Well, no, that's like, stop being a
Yeah.
snob." I wanna so I'm flipping through it, I'm like Perry Farrell, what kinda name is that? And then, yeah, what I will say is that the liners or whatever, they didn't satisfy our curiosity if you're really curious about music. So now we have the internet. If I want to know, like, is Perry Farrell like, is he vegan or is it all the drugs? Is like why is he so skinny? What's up with that? Because I'm a curious, idiot. I can look up that stuff now. Whereas, like, yeah, the leaflet it
Oh,
didn't tell
yeah.
you much back then. So I definitely was not the person reading the lyrics unless I was like, what the heck is that lyric? Like, what are they saying? Yes and no. I had a roommate who, when Hammer's "We Pray" was like his follow
We
up
got
song
to
to like
pray just to make it
he thought it
today.
was like my roommate was from Cincinnati, Ohio. I think he just didn't know rap music. And he thought he was like,
Right.
he's saying wheat bread? I'm like, no, he's not saying wheat bread. What are you kidding? Is that a joke? We borrowed a CD from somebody down the hall in my dorm. I was like, no, see, it says we pray. He's saying
Yeah.
we pray 8 million times. He's not saying wheat bread. Yeah. Yes and no, but it never satisfied my
Yeah.
curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kinda like this podcast. I've learned so much about music that I did not intend on learning, and I wasn't seeking out to learn, but it's been such an awesome exposure that I'm not sorry about. And so it's probably the same thing for you, finding some of those details or trying to be, have it be as realistic as possible in writing the book that accidentally learned a whole bunch of really cool stuff. So that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything more you wanna add about the song from Len?
I don't know. I mean, it's you can listen obviously on any of the streaming platforms, but I'd say just go to YouTube and watch the video once or twice because it's I
Yeah.
guess in the video I did so to give you a second answer to your question you just asked me, I was kind of curious about the video and I looked it up and so they're from Canada. They basically got like I think the band is pretty much just like the brother and sister. And then but they brought
Yeah, and
the
then they
whole
added 3
entourage down to
people.
Daytona. It was in Daytona where they shot that because I had to
Mhm.
look it up. And they all rented motorbikes, scooters, and I guess they brought a cameraman friend and shot this cool video of them just hanging out. And yeah, it's like you watch that video and you kind of want to hang out with them, and that's sort of the spirit of the too. I think.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, I certainly appreciate everything that you shared with my audience. Podcast land, I hope that you enjoyed all of the things that Andy brought to the table about the song, about the 90s, and I hope you just enjoyed his memories to this beat. Podcast land, thank you so much for listening. If you had a few memories of your own pop up with this episode, make sure to take a screenshot, tag me on social, Tiffany Mason or virtually you, and share those memories. I know y'all are listening, and I'd love to hear the memories you were reminded of with this song. Also, would you do me a favor and share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it? This is the best way you can help me to grow my audience. Can't wait to dive into my next guest's memories with a beat. Hit subscribe now. You don't want to miss the next episode.